Today we have Natalie Ledbetter. She is the managing partner of Ledbetter Global Advisory. Natalie helps Series A to Series B founders accelerate growth by connecting people, performance, and revenue.
We have been positioned as an administrative function, as a tactical function for so long. It's now become our responsibility to start to reposition where we sit in an org. And the only way to really get a respected seat at the table is to understand the business inside and out.
I love that you mentioned the table. HR folks, CHROs, they want to earn a seat at that table. The people at the table, they didn't really earn a seat.
Being able to connect those dots allows you to really think like a business owner. In fast-growing startups, you become a different company every 6 to 18 months. Being able to see the full scope, you start to identify the types of DNA that actually will scale. The people who are going to have that staying power.
Hey everybody, this episode of Building the Talent Machine is brought to you by our sponsor, WellFound. If you're a recruiter like me, you're probably always looking for a smarter, faster way to find startup-ready talent. Well, WellFound has you covered. It gives you instant access to a talent pool of 10 million plus startup-minded candidates from all around the globe. You can set up everything in just 10 minutes or less, from posting jobs to building your employer brand and managing applicants, with everything you need to kickstart your recruiting in one place. Need data? WellFound integrates seamlessly with your ATS and helps you stay organized without the chaos. And if you're ready to supercharge your sourcing, meet WellFound AI. Stop scrolling and start hiring. WellFound AI reviews hundreds of profiles each week. It reaches out using hyper-personalized templates, and when candidates respond, it manages the back and forth for you. All that's left is one click to approve, and your calendar fills up fast. So if you're ready to find, connect, and hire your team from pre-seed to IPO and build with the best startup talent out there, WellFound makes it happen. Check out wellfound.com and see how fast you can tap into the startup talent ecosystem. Now, let's go build a talent machine. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the show. Today, we have Natalie Ledbetter. She is the managing partner of Ledbetter Global Advisory and former operating partner and chief people officer at Boldstart Ventures. Natalie helps Series A to Series B founders accelerate growth by connecting people, performance, and revenue, bringing a rare blend of startup operator, VC partner, advisor, and fractional CPO experience to every company she works with. Natalie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Brandon. I'm so glad to be here.
Thanks so much for coming on. Where are you based and what are you working on?
Yeah, so I'm actually based in Brooklyn, or we can just call it New York. And over the last couple of years, I've been building a practice, and we do basically two things. One is a consulting practice where we partner directly with Series A and Series B founders. Sometimes we are also deployed by VCs, and we come in and either a founder has a problem that they can't figure out, something is impacting revenue, really at the end of the day, it is impacting revenue or impacting runway. And so we'll come in, diagnose what the problem is, and then create a strategic program that we actually execute on, hands-on. And it basically touches change management, org design, anything that's related to talent acquisition. And we really offer bespoke solutions. And then the other piece of kind of the business is fractional chief people officer work, where we really come in and own that function. It's a very visible type of engagement. And so we really come in and we'll bridge a gap if the company has maybe a junior team that they're trying to up-level, or they lose their head of people. We're really there to step in and embed like your full-time leader in people operations.
That's awesome. Natalie, what's cool about your experience that you described is that you do the strategic and the tactical work. Why do you like doing that? I don't think a lot of folks have appetite to do tactical work once they get 10, 15 years into their career.
I love that question because it is something that I think about a lot. It's something that I actually talk about a lot as well, which is just this idea of who do you bring in? What is the right DNA? And I call it stage appropriateness. What is the right DNA for the stage of your business today? What's going to scale for the next 12 to 18 months? But what is the ethos of a person who really does well in an environment where they're bringing a new product to market, where there might be huge incumbents in the space that they're very competitive against. And people need to also think about the fact that, especially when you're pulling individuals from larger organizations, as they start to scale and move up ladders, they are moving further and further away from execution on the ground into a strategic type of role where they are big ideas, road mapping, et cetera, but not actually doing the work on the ground. And so the thing that I've learned over the years is just that a lot of those people, A, cannot operate on the ground. It's been so long that they've been actually executing, hands-on executing or building, and or they don't want to. That's actually the biggest thing. People flock to startups because they're fun, but then you realize the level of responsibility of not just these strategic initiatives, but also building whatever the thing is. And most people who have moved up the ladder don't actually want to do that again. And I totally understand that. For me, I am a builder. I am someone that comes into ambiguity. I love spaces where nothing has been built before, where I can architect something new that is valuable and moves the needle. And I think that actually is the key differentiator with when you're working with me, is just the fact that I can step back and think strategically about the organization, scaling the organization, building the organization. But I actually love like building, knowing exactly what my teams do on the ground, understanding the systems. And I think that's just because I'm a very curious person, honestly, at the end of the day.
I love that. I think the most important attribute for startup operators is curiosity and that thirst to deliver value by doing the work itself. And I think that's
That's
what the cool part of people ops evolution is. We're in this time where we're seeing orgs flatten, we're seeing a lot of player coaches, which to me in people operations, like it's a business
Mhm.
function first and a job title second. There are a lot
Yes.
of great straight up operators that are wonderful people leaders. They know what makes humans tick and they can motivate them in a professional setting. So I don't really subscribe to this idea that every HR person needs to have this super lengthy HR career in order to be a great people leader, especially
Right.
in startups.
I can't agree. I think you have nailed it on that is absolutely right. And I would just say, just to double down on exactly what you just said, is just the fact that we have been positioned as an administrative function, as a tactical function for so long that it's now become our responsibility to start to reposition where we sit in an org. And the best way, or probably the only way, to really get a respected seat at the table is to understand the business inside and out and build the connective tissue of people programs that supercharge, again, business results, again, savings, velocity, et cetera. And if you were thinking about the practice, the way that I believe that the new sort of like iteration of people leaders should be thinking about the practice is it starts to almost blur into COO style work, which I think is really fun and interesting, and especially in a function that maybe has been, I don't know, represented as being very archaic for a very long time. So yeah, evolution is happening in people ops, and I could not be more excited about it.
I love that you mention the table. I feel like you can't talk about HR and the work we do with people without hearing the table. HR folks, CHROs, they want to earn a seat at that table. The people at the table, they didn't really earn a seat, they took it. And I think that's
Mm,
what's missing right now with a lot of folks in people ops leadership is they're looking for permission. And the reality is, you come in, you speak the language of the business, you operate at a high level of integrity, velocity, you ship results, you get stuff done, you communicate what you're doing proactively. That's how you stay at the table. Because the reality is, even if somebody grants a seat at the table to these chief people officers, what are they going to do when everybody else at the table just decides to get up and move to another table?
Exactly right. I love that, Brandon. You did such a good job of illustrating that. I think it's a very interesting thing because I speak to founders all of the time. And when I get in front of them, the first types of questions I'm asking are things like revenue, lifetime value, what are your deal sizes, what do your sales cycles look like, et cetera. And by the time that they've answered everything, they're completely confused as to what my job is. And so I think we should all be motivated by the fact that as we become business partners, we become incredibly valuable and true thought partners to founders and the C-suite by starting to understand how to connect all of those dots.
I love that you said motivated. I think the biggest piece of the hiring process that recruiting teams fail to measure in a more standardized way is candidate motivation. Recruiting is an art and a science. People management is an art and a science. We work in tech startups. Tech startups are founded by STEM-oriented, STEM-minded people. So we over-index on what's quantitative because it appeals to the sensibilities of math and science folks. The reality is we need to focus on what is motivating an employee, what is motivating that candidate. To me, that's the fun part, the art of hiring, the art of leading people. So when I think about your craft that you have developed in your career, the titles you've held in your career history have included both people and talent. Talk a little bit about your appetite as a people leader who also enjoys recruiting.
Yeah, I think there might be, I don't know, two or three of us that actually love the TA piece. And part of the reason that I actually enjoy it is we are the first line of defense. We are the ones marketing your employer brand. We're the first touch point that anyone gets when they are coming into an organization. And with that actually comes a lot of power around, building organizations, being able to bring the right people in that are great additions to culture, et cetera. That maybe a hiring manager who isn't deep in TA would look at purely these hard skills without really understanding the story of the human behind everything. And so for me, I think TA is like an incredible opportunity to architect the company, to really architect what does that company look like? What's the feeling of the company? What's the culture of the company? Because that's what people bring. That's the flavor that people bring. And for me, I just always think about the fact that starting with TA, that's actually going to dictate everything in the company going forward, which is why, if you think about recruiting in a very strategic, business-oriented sense, you'll be surprised at how respected that function can become in companies if you can, again, connect all of those dots.
I love that you called out the reality that it's literally like a handful of people. Recruiters, they're always the scapegoats. When things go wrong with an employee, it always goes back to, oh, they were the wrong hire. The reality is I wear that scapegoat with a badge of honor because if it weren't us, it would be our HRBP counterparts. And that's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of baggage. That's a lot of hits on the chin to take and a lot of pressure. And I have a lot of respect for the HR folks in my life, but my whole thing is if you wanted that level of accountability, you would also just work recs because most recruiters can learn and do people ops because they're people and they have high levels of empathy. They're good judges of character. They know how to inspire, motivate, and lead and have very challenging conversations with folks when it comes to feedback. But I don't meet a lot of HR folks that love to recruit. And that's usually why they hire folks that are doing this type of work in a startup, because it's usually like that person that gravitates more towards HR versus the accountability that comes with opening a rec, sourcing and building a pipeline in 2 weeks, and working with hiring managers and closing a candidate. I think a lot of folks shy away from it because they don't like it the way it feels.
Yeah, at the end of the day, recruiting is a sales function. So HR and sales, typically you're not having a huge overlap between these very different sort of skill sets, to be honest. I just think the one thing I will call out about this is just the fact that in a lot of cases, startup founders, again, I'm talking about my experience, which is in these early stage and growth stage startups, just the fact that recruiting is so much harder than people understand. You leave a hiring manager for a week and tell them to take over the rec. When you come back, in almost every single case, at least in my experience, the person has a brand new appreciation for the function. The one thing that I would say, and this is one thing I think just to beware of, is oftentimes founders and or C-suite individuals will equate the function, the people operations function, with recruiting only, and put recruiters into general people operations roles. And again, just like you said, there is a huge opportunity to learn. And everyone that I have met who has started in TA and moved over on to the people operations side has been incredibly valuable because they understand the entire scope. But you want to be really thoughtful about the person that you're putting into that role, at least your first leadership role, because there are things around HR, risk, employee relations, et cetera, that they actually do need experience with.
Yeah, 100%. I've always worked in small companies, even in the public company that I worked for. It was a very small corporate office. We had probably a 20-person recruiting and HR team. And so a lot of us had these like major and minor functions within our remit, which was pretty cool because like I was just a early career coordinator, specialist, IC, taking on these projects that were secondary to working recs. And like, I didn't know my counterparts in other companies didn't do that type of work. To me, I was just like doing the job because my boss said, hey, you're going to go do comp analysis. Hey, you're going to go run our LinkedIn employer brand page. Hey, you're going to go call the recruiting marketing agency and spend our budget for job ads. Hey, you're going to go do some market research and collect 5 RFPs for digital transformation for our ATS. And it's, oh, I was just doing stuff they deployed me out to do. But then I meet recruiters who are like, they work for these really sexy companies and household names. And like, they literally just do interviews or meet with hiring managers. They've got sourcers to fill a pipeline. They've got employer brands to build inbound. They've got recruiting coordinators to schedule and prepare candidates for interviews. And then even some companies have like closers. I know there's like a lot of big tech companies where you'll get like a recruiter handoff at the end when it comes to closing. And there's 2 reasons they do this. One, because they have folks that are very trained around compensation negotiation. And number 2, it derails the proximity of empathy that is built throughout the recruiting process so that recruiters don't cave on meeting compensation requirements. So if you're a candidate and all of a sudden, hey, you interviewed with this awesome recruiter at Google, it's your dream job, and then Google pulls a quick one and you negotiate your offer with the closer, it's really hard as a candidate to get the comp that you're looking for or potentially have that up-leveling conversation when you're fielding your offer from somebody you've just met for the first time on that call. And it's a take it or leave it scenario. So that's just a use case where I learned that just in maybe 5-6 years ago when I started talking to more recruiters in the community. And it's, oh, I'm really grateful that I actually enjoy this recruiting and people ops work because you get a wider breadth of scope to then be able to go out on your own and do things like maybe be a fractional people and talent leader like yourself.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. And the other thing I will say, just because I was saying the fact that a lot of founders and C-suite execs, if they're not super familiar with the process, they will put someone who maybe only has recruiting into that role, which opens a lot of potential for, again, from a risk perspective. But experiential learning really is the best way to learn. That is actually how things become really sticky. And so in your case, the fact that they had you doing all of these tasks that really fell under the people operations umbrella is a great opportunity, like you said, to upskill. And then the other thing I would just mention is if you think about the life cycle of a employee, everything kind of starts with TA. Everything starts with the first touch point, which is employer branding with that particular company. And then it goes to recruiting, which is who are you bringing in? But when you go through people ops, now you actually understand the full scope of what it looks like from the day that they onboard to the day that we offboard them and hopefully introduce them to an alumni community.
I dig that, Natalie. I love this idea of full candidate and employee lifecycle journey mapping. It goes back to what you mentioned being one of the first questions you ask your founders you work with, and it's lifetime value. And that's a challenging number to actually put a pen to from an employee perspective because their contributions and motivations change over time. And there's so many external dynamics at play that are out of the control of even the best people ops leaders.
Mhm.
But I'm glad you called that out because I think we need more recruiters thinking about, hey, what does the employee journey look like? How do we then bring some of those insights into how we're communicating the specific employee value proposition from that bespoke one-to-one conversation?
I love that. You just nailed it. That's exactly what I am consistently looking for. And again, being able to connect those dots allows you to really think like a business owner because, especially in fast growing startups, you become a different company every 6 to 12 to 18 months. And so being able to see the full scope, you start to identify the types of DNA that actually will scale. Most DNA, most people do not scale significantly, but it helps you really identify the people who are going to have that staying power at least for a year to a year and a half, which is typically what a startup employees' tenure looks.
Now, you've got some amazing experience, Natalie. The show is Building the Talent Machine. So let's dive in. Let's talk a little bit about how you built the people and talent machine at Stash.
Yeah, I love my time at Stash. I think it truly is the best job I've ever had. And just what I was talking about from the beginning of this chat was just being able to really understand the business inside and out. And so for me, when I came into Stash, I wanted to understand the product, company mission, goals, customer segments, listening to customer calls and complaints, and really observing the existing culture and how our product aligns with that culture and the customer base. And so coming in with fresh eyes, you're always at a you have a completely different vantage point than people who have really been in it. And for me, I came in at 27 employees, which says a lot about the founders. My founders were like phenomenal, some of the best founders I've ever worked with. But what I was able to rock was the fact that we were building products for customers that basically looked like mostly Black and brown people, very little savings, very little access to financial education. I would say that's probably very systematic. At least that's what I would believe. And so they've been left out of learning how to invest. But when I looked at our employee base, the thing that I noticed was that there was no representation of that customer in our population. And so that became the bellwether for look, we've got to change things up. And so again, fresh eyes, I see these gaping holes. And so luckily I had the founders behind me. They wholeheartedly supported the vision. They threw their support around it. But the things that we were able to do and the things that we did in order to really correct this problem were strategic rebuilds of end-to-end interview processes. What does our ideal candidate profile look like? Who's on our interview panels? What does employer branding look like? How are we going to get those customers into our company based on what are we saying, what are we doing, how are we actually reflecting the brand outwardly? We architected several programs to drive inclusion across our culture because we needed that to be there if we were going to go deep on diversifying our employee base and who we were hiring going forward. We had partnerships with a number of associations of groups that were active in the communities that our customers came from and that we could pull from. We created standards and policies that were incredibly inclusive and really gave people a roadmap for what behaviors were acceptable in our organization and what things would yield disciplinary actions. And then I would just say two last things that I think about a lot, and this is one of the biggest issues I think especially in technology startups, is the being equitable on compensation. And so when we leveled the organization, one of the biggest things we were looking at was discrepancies in not just roles and levels, but discrepancies when it comes to women, people of color, veterans, people of different religious backgrounds, et cetera, and making sure that there was a very equitable kind of thread through everything that we did. And then the last thing that I will say was not the most fun part of what we did, which was just we came out and acknowledged it. We had been called out publicly. And instead of trying to fight this narrative of there's no representation in our organization, we owned it 100% and
Oh, wow.
acknowledged it publicly, took accountability for the fact that we had really fumbled hiring, and made a commitment to the community that we were going to reflect our customers going forward in our teams.
I think you've talked a little bit about your commitment to building great cultures as well. How do you think about trickle down culture from founders in startups or the evolution of culture that goes through those major product financial growth milestones? Because at the end of a startup, when you begin, it's 5 folks around a table or whatever. The culture there looks different from when it becomes a 500 person late stage scale up, pre IPO, Series C, Series D. How do you think a people ops practitioner or leader preserves culture through those changes, even through M&A or IPO?
That's challenging. That might be one of the hardest things that I think people operations practitioners do, is having to bring cultures together, especially disparate cultures. And speaking back, like reflecting on my time at Stash, there's actually a great example of this. First Round put out a study that said 80% of your culture at an organization comes from the top. I believe that wholeheartedly. Part of why I even joined the company was because of the founders. Low ego, excited about learning, didn't take themselves too serious, extremely curious, but they came from finance. They came from hedge funds. They didn't come from technology. And so when I joined the company and fintech was really just starting to come up, one of the first questions that I asked the company was, or asked the founders was, are we a financial services firm or are we a technology firm? Because that actually is going to dictate who we go about hiring, who we're trying to bring in. And what I noticed also coming in with fresh eyes was that there really was a culture clash in terms of talent, not just from the perspective of the diversity, but also from the perspective of just very unique, different types of organizations. So we had a financial services professionals who come from investing, banking, hedge funds, VC, et cetera. And then we had this other part of the business, which was building software. And most of our people came from earlier stage startups. So how do you start to merge those two very disparate populations and create an environment for everybody, all of them, to do their best work? And hard problem, but if you get super strategic, I think you can really beat those types of culture clashes. And so when I asked them that question, they were pretty clear. we're a tech startup. We took VC money. We are a tech startup. And so I acknowledge that there was this culture clash. We aligned on what the strategic vision for the future looked like at Stash. And then my team actually went to work. So looking at different candidate profiles for the investment side of the business, honing in on the DNA, but also the signals to look for when you're interviewing professionals who are coming from that background. And we wanted to be looking for people who would really flourish in an environment of ambiguity and white space. And what ended up happening out of that also was we ended up with a really great referral program. Once we started hiring for that candidate profile, we went about building a really heavy referral reward scenario where people were referring their friends, their ex-colleagues, etc., that really fit with this culture. The other thing that I would say, and this is really important when you are bringing, again, these very disparate cultures together, we provided as many opportunities as we could to build relationships across the different kind of sides of the business. And so we really invested, we dove headfirst into what can we do to bring all of these people together. There is tons of data that supports the fact that if you have a best friend at work, if you have close friends at work, what ends up coming out of that is not just engagement, but it actually has significant business impacts. And so we weren't creating environments for them to just have fun for fun's sake. It was in the spirit of allowing them to build relationships, have time away from the office so that they could start to get these kind of personal relationships going, and not just, I guess, on teams, but also cross-functionally. And the other thing I would say that I think is really important too is, especially when you're in an office environment, and this was one of the things that we invested in, was office design, office layout. And so when we were putting everything together for what the office was going to look like, I think we made 3 moves while I was there. When we got to our home, we created opportunities for engineered serendipity, for teams to meet each other in the kitchen, in different areas of the office, really using it as a forcing function. And then also seating them together, seating them in close proximity to each other so that they're learning through osmosis, which is just purely hearing the conversations that are going on with the teams, hearing people on phone calls, and really starting to understand what this side of the business actually looks like and how those things all tie together.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you said forcing function. I love a good forcing function. It's such like a tech bro startup term, but I love it. It's let's put these arbitrary deadlines on ourselves for controllable forcing functions. But then I'm a little bit of a bro. I love the external forcing function of market conditions and competition. That is the beauty of capitalism, is there's always going to be competition. So what are you doing today as a team to be able to overcome the challenges you'll face through those forcing functions that are out of our control as business operators? Because ultimately, if you are employee 27, the way you described, chances are low that somebody else in the org is doing exactly what you do with your responsibilities. That is on you. And I love that sink or swim ethos that you carry and that I see other startup people operators carry. You also talked a little bit about VC. And while venture capital, like, yes, it is a financial institution so that it is regulated under laws like the Bank Secrecy Act. Venture capital, let's be honest, it's really just glorified gambling. And the BSA exists so that it is not seen as a vehicle for money laundering, but it is very high risk, high reward. And we can bring that back to what you said around the motivations of people and the culture. It's really important that early stage startup employees know what they're signing up for. You said it earlier. It seems fun. It seems cool to work for a startup. There's probably a bunch of people at your co-working space or your cousin's boyfriend that's got a really cool startup job. We all have an Uncle Tony who made 2 million bucks at Uber. The
Mhm.
reality is this is not sexy work. This is high
Mhm.
risk, high reward, tremendous pressure, accountability. And right now in the venture startup world, we're seeing a lot of talk around company culture evolving as it goes back to an employer's market. We're playing with house money
Mm.
now. And one of those phrases is the 996. So 9 to 9, 6 days a week. Let's go in and crush it. What are your thoughts on work culture evolving and people cranking out hours for their startups in a venture capital environment for a small early stage company? I'm talking like seed, series A, maybe series B.
Yeah, I'm of two minds here. I think that you have to understand when you are getting into an earlier stage startup that, again, you're going to be building in white space. That ambiguity is a baseline, that you're not going to have the resources, you're not going to have the money, you're not going to have the people, the systems, etc. And so you take that on yourself. And sure, it is the recruiter's responsibility, TA's responsibility to educate our candidates. But that said, this is something that people should know about startups. And so when I think about especially very early stage hiring, I think about who can I get like a person and a half out of, as opposed to thinking about one individual contributor. Bringing it to the 996 thing, I get it. I think that actually there's a world where that's already been happening. We just really haven't named it before. I think that actually is, especially when you're talking about seed and series A, it actually ends up looking like that anyway. But what I would say going forward, especially once you get past sort of that growth stage, is just that 996, great concept, totally understand it. You're getting the most out of your employees, but at what cost? And I think burnout is a real thing. We have the worst level of engagement of employees that we've ever had, at least in the United States. And I think part of that comes from the fact that teams are really leaning out. They're also starting to invest in AI, et cetera, which starts to create redundancies. But burnout is real. And once you burn someone out, you essentially are basically saying, I'm going to rehire for this role. So I have a hard time with 996. I think it makes sense in those early days because, frankly, that's why you get into startups. Exactly what you said: high risk, high return, fast pace, building where there's nothing has ever existed before, insane curiosity. All of those things are true. But I would just say that in most cases, at least in my experience, it's been a 996 situation without me having to call it a 996 situation. I think it's once you get past that part where you are bringing a product to market and or you're taking that kind of product to the next step or next inflection point, once we get past that, the 996 way of working, it just doesn't really align with the, I guess, the momentum of the business. And sure, it can help you step on the gas. But I think at the end of the day, you have to really think about the cost of losing people to burnout.
Yeah, I think burnout is real. It goes back to the motivation piece. And oftentimes when you talk about like hiring for referrals are like always the best post hire outcomes in early
Sure.
stage companies. People like working with folks that they know and trust. But when you think about the motivations of people and the patterns that we use when we recruit folks into early stage startups, is has this person done this before in the industry within this remit for the role? And do they want to do it again? I think that's the biggest piece to avoid
Mm-hmm.
burnout,
Yep.
especially in startups where folks have a lot of career mobility. You may have 3, 4, 5 different jobs on your resume in the same
Yep.
time that historically your homies in big tech might have had, or slower velocity industries in the S&P where people spend 5, 10 years at one job. I think
Yep.
it's important for us when we review resumes to leave those preconceived notions at the door and really just understand what work do people want to do? How are you going to avoid burnout?
Exactly.
We work 12-hour days. You're going to get
Right.
3 catered meals within that day and work at a super dope place with a gig of fiber going right into your $2,000 MacBook. Do you want to do that? We're also
Right.
going to Cancun twice a year for our
Right.
offsites. So it's a give and take relationship. And my school of thought is startups skew younger hiring anyways, and younger
Mhm.
people, they fill their week with 72 to 80 hours of whatever. You are building a craft. You're going to
Mhm.
spend 72 to 80 hours a week doing that regardless. So you're
Mhm.
right. We just rebranded something that already exists, and
Right.
now people are mad about it.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And that's the whole entire point is it does skew young because in a lot of cases they don't actually have work experience to benchmark with the different lifestyles that they could look for in terms of their career and what their career provides from a lifestyle perspective, and being in these environments that sometimes feel a little academic in terms of working with teams, building projects, etc. It really does pull in a lot of very young people. I would also caution founders and C-suite execs on the young hires only because they don't have anything to benchmark it against. And their output, all of these things that they have to learn, communication style, how to negotiate, etc., that's all new to them. And you're going to be teaching those things. And what does that mean? That pulls you away from the work that you are doing, the work that actually your job entails in order to mentor or grow someone who's really junior. So I think there's actually there's a balance that you have to look for. And the other thing I would just say is the research is really showing that we're looking for generalists. I hate that word. I think it implies that you're mediocre. I like to think of people as Swiss Army knives, as people with that are good at a lot of different things. But yeah, I think you're exactly right. And I think it is a rebrand of or at least all early stage folks have been doing for their entire careers. And that honestly is just baseline. So like hearing it marketed is very odd because yeah, we already do that. So just a very interesting thing to see this concept and talked about in this particular way.
Yeah, I'm not a chess pro, but as you're saying this, I'm thinking like, yeah, in the world of work, we're all pawns anyway. But in a startup, like you might be up leveled to a bishop or a rook or a knight or something.
Right.
Natalie, I've really enjoyed this conversation and I love hearing a little bit about how you built the talent machine and people machine at Stash. Do you have any advice for people that are recruiting or people ops folks in this market today?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that I have noticed about this market, and I actually have data to support this, is that at this point, people are not getting jobs for the most part from sending in a resume, getting an interview, and landing the job. What I see right now, and again, this is just my lens of other chief people officers, how everyone is sharing and different other groups in the TA space. And what I'm seeing is referrals all day. It is, do you have an HRBP that you'd recommend? Do you have a TA person that you'd recommend? And some of this actually results in pulling people out of businesses. And so the best thing that you can do as a TA professional, I think, is when you're going out and you're starting that kind of cold outbound like messaging, you actually are starting to build real relationships with people. And I think that's the one piece also that AI hasn't solved for yet is this, I hate calling it soft skills, feels very gendered. But that said, the relationship building skills become incredibly important when we're talking about an environment where it's all about who do you know? So I think building your network is actually building your pipeline. And so that's the biggest thing that I would say is like relationship building should be at the forefront of everything that a TA person is doing right now, because that's what the market is saying.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm hearing from some folks too that the network has dried up a little bit as well.
Mhm.
But yeah, my motivation for folks is that they get out there, they keep focused on biz dev and the relationship side of all of this so that they can advance their career and pass the ladder to the next generation. Natalie, this has been absolutely wonderful. How can people stay in touch with you and keep up to date on the work you're doing?
Awesome. Yeah. So Natalie Ledbetter on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is usually the best way to find me. My website is just natalieledbetter.com. And yeah, I would just say LinkedIn is usually where you're going to find me because I do a lot of content and things like that. So I basically direct everyone there.
Amazing. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Brandon. Appreciate it.